Hi, Dr. P here to provide some advice for building for gamers and perhaps novelists. This is beginner's notes. It's not comprehensive. It's primarily for gamers, but much of it applies to fiction writers. So think about it. Some people devote much of their working lives to world building, as for some fantasy or SF novelists who have Tolkien in mind and how much time he spent on world building. Remember that a game world is a way to help people write their own stories, though it can help you write your own story if you choose. So don't overdo it. Your world is an adjunct to your story or game, not the goal. It's a means to an end. In other words, not an end in itself, unless you're very unusual. A mistake that many beginners make is to spend vast amounts of time on the world and not get around to what really matters, which is the game or the story. So most people can take the simple route. My friend Jeffro says you only need to know 6 things about the world to get started on the adventure. He doesn't specify categories of the 6. I don't think he was thinking in categories. In other words, you only need to know enough to let the adventure push forward. You don't need to know all the details about the world. Nonetheless, here are some questions you can ask yourself. And I'm not going to repeat every question here. There's 2 screens worth because I'm going to go through each one individually. So there's a second screen. And now we go through each one. Well, first of all, though, I want to mention communications and transport, which are 2 big questions. How fast is communication and how fast is transport? In science fiction, we can have instantaneous commo and much slower movement, though not the reverse, of course, as movement speed can also be commo speed. In fantasy, both are usually slow, as in a medieval world, but it doesn't have to be that way. So, the first question is, what are the players or characters in a novel going to do? For the majority of game players, I think games are about doing. They're not there to admire your world. And we can say that even of novels as well. Even if you're talking about a world that's part of a novel, what's important is the events of the novel. So we could revise that heading and say, what are the characters of the novel going to do? Now, occasionally the worlds are so striking that people are there in part to admire the novel. Larry Niven's Ringworld comes to mind. Tolkien's world is often admired, and so forth. The next question is, who are the main enemies? This can be anywhere from individual villains to entire nations or species. Now, individual villains can be more personal, more me against him, more or her, more I'm going to get this guy or this girl, no matter what. The large villains, such as a nation or a species, can provide the feeling of being overwhelming, of inevitable failure or despair. And that may be a feeling you want to introduce to your game or your novel. The next question, what's the terrain and do you need a map? You probably need a local map, but not a world map. Now, there's a somewhat difference here between games and novels. Games need a local map. They don't need a world map. Novels often get away with a world map, or at least a large part of the world, and there's no local map. Of course, if you're doing games, you can add to the local map as necessary, and you can decide whether it's mountains, forest, the sea, or something else. Volcanoes? Who knows? Maps are fun, but on the other hand, if you make the entire world map now, and that'll be much larger than you think, you limit yourself. Science fiction and fantasy author Glenn Cook, who wrote the Black Company stories among a lot else, doesn't like maps because they constrain what he's writing. So he doesn't provide many maps. And it's hard to follow exactly where people are because he's not worried about that. He's worried about the events of the novel. The next question is there a war on? A war is a straightforward and immediate cause of action. It can be a generalized war on evil, or it can be much more specific. I always think of fantasy role-playing games as good against bad, and that's the way I play it. War provides opportunities for action, such as scouting, that don't usually exist in peacetime, and provide a focus that some campaigns lack. Otherwise, what is the focus? I'm not going to go into focuses, but I assume that a focus is a good thing. The next question is who or what dominates the local area? The player characters and the novel characters are more likely to operate just in a local area. Whoever dominates that area may become a major adversary and certainly controls a lot of what happens, or they may be a great help to the players or the characters. Another question, how present are the gods? In a way, this is a background question, but it can be very important. For example, in my D&D campaigns, over the course of 40 plus years or thereabouts, a god has never appeared. Even the non-human representatives of gods are rare. Human and other clerics are about as representative as it gets. Player characters or novel characters are not likely to be able to do much to the gods themselves, nor to their stronger representatives like archangel equivalents. I know that in some campaigns players fight gods, but I'd quote the Hulk, puny god. Is there a great mystery going on in the campaign? Now, I'm not a reader of mystery novels, but many people are. Of course, it doesn't have to be a murder mystery, although it could be who murdered the king or the queen or something like that. You could ask, what happened to the famous adventurer? Where's he gone? Where is the fabled huge jewel? Who has been killing, or what has been killing the locals? Where is the last dragon, quote unquote? Another question, how much does magic influence the world? This has a lot to do with how the game plays. Consider Tolkien's Middle-earth, where magic is very rare. I wrote an article long ago using Moria as a game for beginners, people who had never played before, and I had to evaluate Aragorn and Gandalf and so on. Aragorn was like a 7th level ranger and Gandalf was an 8th level cleric with a ring of warmth. And people immediately said, oh my god, they're much more powerful than that. They're not. It's just that in Tolkien's world, there's hardly anybody who's really powerful. And so a 7th level ranger and 8th level cleric really stands out. On the other hand, we have worlds where magic is a substitute for technology, and it's quite common. There's a big difference in how those worlds work. And I recommend that you read my series of articles, The 4 Stages of Magic. There are 3 parts, and here are the URLs. It's all on ianworld.org on my column, Worlds of Design. The next question is, how common are adventurers? Are adventurers or heroes as common as professional athletes? And ask yourself how many professional athletes you've met. Or are they as common as national congressmen and women? Have you ever met any one of those? Or as common as police officers? I'm sure you've met police officers somewhere along the line. It makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in how people treat the adventurers. It makes a difference in how states solve problems. If there are bunches of adventurers around, they may solve problems by sending adventurers. If there are very few adventurers, then they've got to find a different way to solve their problems or come up perhaps with a lot of money. And we come back to transportation and communication. In Dungeons & Dragons, barring a few magic items, these are slow. You can get a magic carpet or a crystal ball, but most people do not have that capability. On the other hand, in Star Wars, communication is instantaneous throughout the galaxy, which is pretty amazing. And transportation by spaceship is nearly instantaneous. One calculation was that Ships could go 25,000 light years a day. The difference is felt especially in warfare. And of course, I have to interject here that Star Wars warfare is absolute nonsense given the other parameters involved. Now, you want to write your ideas down on a computer or on paper. And there may be software that can help you in general. For example, I've run across a recommendation for software called Gransica. It's for fiction writers to keep track of all their characters and so on and so forth, but it might be useful for serious world builders. But I have no experience with it, so I can't say. Map drawing software can be general drawing software like CorelDRAW or Inkscape, or it can be specific like Pro Fantasy software. It can be free, or it can be commercial. And if you Google search fantasy map software, you'll find some of the free as well as the commercial. Now I'm going to leave you with my admonition. Don't spend so much effort on the setting that you forget about the game or the novel. Get on with what's important. It's the game or the novel. Thanks for listening.